Welcome to the Art of Living Free series with Anthony Silard. We would love your support to keep these valuable videos and podcasts free for everyone. To make a donation, please visit theartoflivingfree.org. 100% of all proceeds go to nonprofit education programs. Today, Dr. Silard continues exploring the personal test we each must rise to during the pandemic, Thinking for Ourselves, Part 2.
Hi, I'm Anthony Silard, and welcome to the Art of Living Free. Today we're going to explore what I call the personal test each of us must rise to during the pandemic, thinking for ourselves. Never has this challenge been more present in our lives than today. We receive news from so many sources through social media, through newspapers, magazines, our phones, the television, and it's flying fast and furious 24/7. So how to consume the news? Well, what I would propose is come up with your go-to sources for the news and try to focus on those. It may be, hey, the Johns Hopkins website for news on COVID. It's a magazine called The Week, which is kind of a summary of the news. I read that once a week. You may prefer The Economist or Time or New York Times or Washington Post or Fox News, whatever it is you like. Decide what's your credible source. And I think there's a lot to be said for making it a kind of a tradition, reading one source of the news that you consider to be the sort of presenting both sides. That's why I like The Week. The Week presents both sides of different news stories. It's not just the left or the right. But find your credible source. And if you can read it in print form, I would recommend it, because something about the actual environment of being on our smartphone. There's something about being in this online environment that increases our anxiety even more. Why might that be? Well, I don't know about you, but like when I read The Week, which is a magazine, you know, it's like what you see is what you get. These are the stories here, and I kind of feel like, okay, I'm making some progress. I've read the main, I don't read the whole thing, but I've read the main sections I want to read, and then I put it down. Well, when you go online, it's different. Now you've got, okay, you press this, you hover over this, and it takes you to another link. It's endless. Is limitless. So the human vigilant system, which is like, hey, you know, I want to make sure I neutralize all the threats in my environment so I can keep myself and my family safe. That's we're biologically wired to do that. Like, you're never going to be done, because if you're on your phone or you're on your laptop or your tablet, there's a limitless supply of news, all of them that will, if you want to keep going and going and going, more tips to stay safe, more, here's a better rendering of the threats in your environment, because now you can look at what happened to this person who lives one county away, or this other person in another state, how they handled, this person did this during the pandemic, this person did that, whatever it is. Okay, schools reopening. You can go and look at schools reopening news for 10 hours in different states, what's happening. And all of this because you feel a threat to you and to your family. Like, really? Yeah, you know what? My kids are learning on Zoom online and they're not developing their socio-emotional abilities. I want to know when schools are going to reopen, right? So there's so many different levels that the news helps inform us and stay vigilant. And that's a good thing, but not if we overdo it, not if we're unable to regulate how we consume the news. Consuming the news is like consuming food or drink. It's consuming information. It is consuming. What we consume affects us, affects our well-being. And that's where we have to be very careful. So let's play a little game. Let's suppose I were to say to you, hey, I am the tragedy alerter, okay? So the greatest threat in your environment, perhaps you might say, are new cases of COVID in my state. And so let's suppose I were to say to you, okay, I'm the tragedy alerter. How often would you like me to come and tell you how close you are to tragedy? How often would you like me to come and tell you how many new cases there are of COVID in your state? Well, you might say, that's okay. Why don't you come by every few days, right? Or you might say once a week. Maybe you'd say once a day. But you're never going to say to me, you know what, can you come by like like 150 times per day or 30 times per day? I don't think anyone is going to say that. I've asked thousands and thousands of these people these kinds of questions in my conferences. No one has ever said that. Your vision for how often you should be exposed to the news is that you're saying you'd like it once every few days, for example, or once a day, or twice a week, or once a week, whatever it is, however you answer that when we play this little game. Your vision in this game we're playing is that me, the tragedy alerter, should come by and tell you, hey, here's the news so you can protect your existence. That's basically why we tune into the news so often, because we want to protect our lives and our existence and our families. So you'd like me to come by every day or every few days, or you might say, hey, if there's a real emergency, like this is what would be a real emergency, you know, and you give me the definitions, then come by anytime, right? So if you're saying come by once a day or twice a week or however often you want, but then you're checking the news 100 times a day, would you agree with me that in general, when our values and our behavior are inconsistent, that's what leads to unhappiness? That's what leads to misery even? Well, that is the case for most of us. News regulation, this term that I'm really trying to put forth, news regulation is not something we do. We check it all the time. We check our phones all the time and our computers all the time for all the different news out there. And in fact, the average number of times that we touch our phones per day is over 2,600 based on a recent study. The actual like full interactions where like meaning the times you pick up your phone and touch and do a bunch of different things and then set your phone down, 160 per day. So if let's say that out of those 160 on average, anything involving the news is a third of them. So let's say it's 50, okay? So then if you're telling me that the tragedy alerter should come by 2 or 3 times a week, but then you're checking news on your phone 50 times per day, that means that your values and your actions are unaligned. And that's the case for most of us. So what can we do to turn this around? Develop a vision for how often you would like to check the news. Understanding that checking the news is one of the actions you take to protect yourself and to protect your family. Make it a custom, make it a tradition, how often you're going to check the news. If you can, try to check a newspaper, a written newspaper or magazine, rather than always on your phone, because again, the phones have all these other links and that circumspect, vigilant part of ourselves will keep us going to all those links, because more I can do to protect myself and my family, and before you know it, it's 3 hours later, and really you haven't protected yourself very well, because you're basically there's a cytokine storm going on, raging inside your body, and your immune system is on hyper alert, and there you are sitting at home, and there's no direct threat. It's all these kind of like lurking, loose threats that we perceive. If you're checking news apps on your phone, put them on the last screen. So you've got to go like 7 or 8 times to get to that news app, as opposed to checking it. You see it on your home screen, oh, BBC, boom. No, put it on the last screen if it's addictive for you. Okay, so one more reason why we check the news so often. A lot of research in psychology has found that we as human beings are what are called cognitive misers. We are very miserly in the way we direct our cognitive attention. We don't like to think very much, is basically what it means. We're cognitive misers because our cognitive resources or attentional resources, we like to hold them. We don't like to use them very often because it taxes our brains. So this is why we check the news so often, because most of us have never managed a pandemic before, and we don't know how to do it. We're like, how should I be thinking about the pandemic? So since I can't figure that out myself, let other people figure it out for me. And let me read all these different news sources all the time, and I'll just listen to what other people tell me about how I should be thinking about the pandemic. Well, the problem with that is there are so many sources out there. There are so many people just like you who are relatively quarantined, not going out very much, and they're writing and speaking their thoughts, just like I'm doing here, to be quite honest, they're sharing their thoughts about the current situation. And we are imbibing all this. We're receiving all of this information, and we're not developing our own sense of how we think about our lives and about what's going on right now. I think the paramount challenge today is developing our capacity of thinking for ourselves, especially during this pandemic. Really look at, like, what does this particular crisis, what are the lessons that it's shown up to provide for you? What can you learn from it? It has been very challenging for many people whose loved ones have perished. I am just saying, if you are still here, that you, instead of just feeling like a victim, you can feel also like you can take ownership of it. Like, okay, I own it. This is where the world is right now, and how am I going to forge a better path ahead? So your vision for how you're going to regulate the news will guide actually how you consume the news, rather than having these apps guide you, which is the way they were designed.
Life offers us many challenges, and theartoflivingfree.org offers new ways of thinking, so we can see these challenges from a new angle and overcome them. Whether it's Anthony Silard's free blog, video or podcast series, his book, Screened In: The Art of Living Free in the Digital Age, or personalized courses, theartoflivingfree.org will help you refine your life vision and then transform it into action. Find out more at theartoflivingfree.org.